Back.
Oh, we're back, fellas.
All right. Today we're going to be talking about Canada's future, a little bit about Trudeau and how his reign went in Canada, and then a little bit about like how the future is going to go. So we're going to split this up with me kind of analyzing a little bit of like Trudeau's tendencies and his policies for this part, and the second part, Carson's going to dive into the potential with the future candidate we have from a differing party. So it's kind of like a yin yang situation here. We're giving you best of both worlds.
Absolutely. You go ahead and get into your part, Pete.
All right. So I think it's well known, dude. Trudeau, I'm just going to say it first. Trudeau's a communist. Okay. And I'm going to give you reasons why he's a communist. All right. Here we go. Here's a quote. There are shared values, openness, compassion, willingness to work hard, to be there for each other, to search for equality and justice. Those qualities are what makes us the first post-national state. This is Trudeau directly after becoming prime minister in 2015. And he followed it with, it's not how Canadian you are, it's who you are in Canada, which is very silly. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so you guys can kind of see what we're rocking with, because I actually have it. This is from Modern Age Journalism. It's a Canadian journalism site. Let me get this pulled up here. So that's the quote right there. All right. Now, this kind of just shows you, and it exemplifies Trudeau's history of downplaying the historical significance of Canada as a nation. And he's done this by replacing historical monuments and reverence for long dead prime ministers with a commitment to diversity and a set of shared values.
Right.
For
example, just to piggyback onto that a little bit, didn't Trudeau change the passports in Canada from having historically significant Canadian figures to a picture of him as a little boy out at the lake with?
I didn't know that. That sounds like that sounds like a sob story,
bro. Yeah, he literally changed their passports, like all the great historical Canadian figures, took them off and put a picture of him as a little boy on there for their passports. Like, it's just silly business, bro. This guy, absolutely.
That's another good example right there. I mean, again, the monuments thing has been happening consistently, which is a part of erasing history that Marxists love to do. And I don't really dive into this later, so I'll go ahead and kind of dive into it now. This is what is happening in the West in large part, not just in Canada, but in the United States as well. When these big groups like Black Lives Matter, which is actually a Marxist organization, if you don't know that, look into it. I'm not going to fucking spew out the same thing a million people have already said. BLM is a Marxist organization. It's using emotional tactics and propaganda tactics to get a specific group of people to support them without even using their rational minds. Because it's like, oh, they hate you, you're black, they're going to kill you, whatever. And then they use that money to siphon it off into their own funds and different political purposes. And they do it to erase history and guilt European, like ethnically European Americans, or that have a European lineage, into being shameful for being part of the race that is contributed to 95% of all innovations in technology in the history of the world and developed all modern society to almost every extent. And so it's clearly a propaganda technique. If you're a part of the European ethnic heritage and you're ashamed of your ethnic heritage, you've been propagandized. That's not some opinion. That's a fact, because there's no reason for the most objectively successful ethnic group to be ashamed of themselves. That's crazy as fuck. Right. All right. So we're going to keep it rolling here, but Trudeau is a member of this camp of people that want us to feel shame for being white and male and straight. So we're kind of in that bucket of like people that like really need to feel bad. Yeah. Why do you think they want us to feel so bad? First of all, that's a good question. Keep that in mind. All right.
I don't feel bad, Pete. I'm feeling quite all right.
I'm feeling pretty good too.
That's how you know you're right.
That's right. So we have another article. This is an infamous article. It's been referenced a lot of times, but it's by the National Post Review. And I'll go ahead and hit this one here. So there's a specific part of this where it says, the message sent to our 1 million newcomers per year is that Canada is an unimportant, historically unremarkable country driven by a vicious desire to abuse, discriminate against, and extinguish Indigenous and other non-European cultures. If some aren't interested in embracing traditional Canadian values, who can blame them? There's little to be proud of, according to Trudeau's historical revisionism.
Unbelievable, dude.
That's just it's a characterization. So it's not a quote from Trudeau. It's someone analyzing how he's comported himself within the office and how he's talked about the history. I think it's pretty accurate. And again, this is more of a conservative post, as you can see. But I think what invariably occurred by this shift in cultural identity has completely changed. It's completely changed the shared cultural values of the Canadians to a shared land enclosed within the same borders. And that has a big problem in its premise, because if there's no cultural ties that brings you together, what's going to prevent you from separating or infighting at all? And we could bring in the stats about homogenous societies and how they have higher percentages of like donating to charity, of involvement in community activities, high trust,
lower crime.
Less crime, and all that. But I think there's a reason for this. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
it's pretty complicated, because you could go towards, oh, this is ignorance. You know, you don't want to attribute malice to something that could be ignorance. It's a Pierre quote. You know, I'm kind of taking your spot, but
yeah,
that is a Pierre quote from that video with JP. And I can't help but think there's malice as well as ignorance, and I can't tell how much of each there is. But either way, it's terrible.
Well, one thing I want to add to kind of on what you just said and what you said earlier about a post-nationalist society and how people shouldn't be proud to be from Canada. You ought to be ashamed about our history and yada yada. And that's why I guess that's part of the push for a post-nationalist society. The problem with that is, in a democratic nation, if you convince your entire population that your country is a no good country and we don't even deserve to like be proud of ourselves, you're not going to get good leaders that way. If you don't have a leader that's going to go into office to try to better the country because he cares about the country, he wants to make the country stronger, all these things, that's what makes an economy good. It's what makes a country great. And obviously Trudeau has not had that mindset, and just look what's happened. And I mean, this is what happens all around the world. I mean, we had in America here, we've had, Biden and Harris, two people who I think they're very beholden to their own interests and their own socialism that's going on in the Democratic Party right now. I don't think they actually care about making America great. And I think,
fuck no, dude. They don't give a shit, dog. If you think they care about America, you're on fucking drugs, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of speaking to the choir here. I think 99% of conservatives would echo that sentiment. But that's what has made Trump such a revolutionary figure in the political space, is that his whole thing is about making America better economically, better for its workers, better as far as global influence, but also, trying to reduce the wars overseas, which actually prioritizes American soldiers and a lot of our tax dollars. That's his whole message, is what makes America great, because here in America, at least on the right, we care about making America in the United States a great country. If all any of us did in America was soak about how our history is so terrible, we need to go post-global because we don't even deserve to try to be great or anything like.
Right. But why do we want to make it great, right? We want to make it great because we respect the history and the foundation of America.
That's why you can't discredit
taking away the respect for the history that led us to where we are leads to a lack of nationalistic rigor, which will also lead to a lower participation in, army forces, in public services, like police force, stuff like that. We could even reference the LA shit with the firefighters, which is hilarious. Did you see that clip? We'll probably talk about it in another video.
Less empowered leaders that aren't going to prioritize your country at that point. They're going to lean into all the lobbying interests overseas and this new globalization thing. That's, the new globalization government that they're trying to put in place. And that's obviously a video for a different day. We can get into that later.
That's going to be a big one. I want to wait till there's like big news about it before we dive into it, because that'll be a big one. I've got a lot to say about that. But we'll keep it rolling. So again, the trend is, let's feel bad about our history. I'm not Canadian, but I feel for the Canadians here. So I'm speaking as an American who cares about Canada as a neighboring country, the biggest shared border from a country, like from a single country to another country on the planet, is Canada to America. And there's never been a war at that border. So we've had amicable relationships there, but in order to maintain that, we can't have a communist state above us. And I think it's better for the people there too. So let's keep it rolling. So Canada actually has a long-standing history of respect for other cultures and identities. So French and English are recognized official languages of the country. So America only has one recognized official language, English, obviously. In 1971, over a quarter of the country spoke French as their first language at 27.1%. So that kind of falls in the face of like this whole idea that it's like a monolith. Like the people of Canada are like, they only care about like this sort of like, British, Irish, whatever the historical. I mean, again, there's more of a French history there, but again, it's already been a little bit multicultural from its inception. Okay, there's been respect from its inception.
Right, and that requires, my bad, that requires at least a semi-tolerant society to make that work.
Yeah, at some level.
So that at least pushes back to a certain extent on their whole point that it's all evil and the people of the past weren't being inclusive or whatever bullshit rhetoric they're trying to push at this point. But
yeah, and the rhetoric about Canada's history of discrimination, colonization, and slavery have been construed to fit Trudeau's agenda in the modern political climate. So let me go through a couple of like really simple history right here. There's a couple of points here. All right. Canada, its first anti-slavery law was the Act Against Slavery, passed in 1793. It was the first anti-slavery law in the British Empire. Denmark was the first European country to ban the slave trade, which was in 1792. So Canada's first anti-slave law passed 1 year after the first European country to ban the slave trade. So it was very early to the party to ban slavery. Let's go through a few others. Britain banned the slave trade in 1807, but it didn't officially abolish slavery in its colonies with the Slavery Abolition Act until 1833. Sweden banned the slave trade in 1813. Netherlands banned the slave trade in 1814. France banned the slave trade in 1817. Ghana, the British, banned the slave trade in Ghana in 1808, but it wasn't actually abolished until around 1870. And then the Cape Colony in South Africa, the slaves were fully emancipated on December 1st, 1838. The UN, its slavery convention wasn't adopted until 1926. Okay, and now is the big one, all right? This is the number of people living in modern slavery in Africa in 2021, according to the latest research. We have 1.6 million slaves living in Nigeria today. They're not fucking Europeans, my guy. It's not fucking colonialized out there. It's fucking dark-skinned people owning other dark-skinned people. What the fuck do we have to feel bad about? All right.
Yeah.
According to the latest global estimates, around 50 million people are currently living in modern slavery worldwide, which would include both forced labor and forced marriage situations.
Right.
None of these countries are European or white colonial societies, and the majority are in Africa. What does Canada have to feel bad about?
Yeah, I mean, that alone should dispel any argument that there's some inherent evil in white people because of the history that they have with slavery. Slavery is not just a white cultural problem. It's been all around the world for all of time. And the fact that people even try to propagate that whenever there's these numbers right here, and none of those countries are predominantly white.
Read them. Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, Congo, Eritrea, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, Sudan, Tanzania. I thought it was Tanzania. Tanzania, that's what it is. South Africa, Cameroon, Mauritania, Angola. Those are all in Africa.
Yep. So if you have some kind of belief out there, whoever's watching, that there's some inherent evil in white people based off of slavery and the history of that in the United States, consider this your wake-up call. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
Think again, communists.
Think again.
All right. we're gonna keep this rolling, dog, because I'm about to dive into something that is really gonna, I think, break down Trudeau's views on the world. Okay. Given all these facts that we've just presented about slavery and the historical slave trade and the laws banning slavery, is it possible that there is another reason for someone like Trudeau to use language such as racism or even bigotry, homophobia, Islamophobia, and the rest? Mainly, we're focusing racism, bigotry here. But could there be another reason for using this type of language?
No, that's impossible.
All right.
Impossible.
I would say one
There's no
could
way.
make the claim that these buzzwords and the forceful shame impressed upon those with European roots is taken right out of the communist playbook.
Really?
Here we go.
You don't say.
Here's what we're going to do. I think my screen's still sharing. You see this?
Yeah, I'm still on the Africa thing.
Okay, let me go back. Go back here. Here we are. Share this tab instead. Okay. On the role of agitation and propaganda. This is an active Marxist communist website. So this website is called Marxists.org. The people that contribute to this website are Marxists and communists. And according to Karl Marx, class consciousness is an awareness that is key to sparking a revolution which would, quote, create a dictatorship of the proletariat, transforming it from a wage-earning, propertyless mass into the ruling class. And so communists often talk about the crucial importance of revolutionary agitation and propaganda. So that's what we see here. And I think this is for good reason, because together with agitation and propaganda, they are a mighty and indispensable weapon in the party's revolutionary arsenal. Now, this is coming directly from Marxist.org. We're going to go down to the quote here. And this is a quote right at the top here. I'm going to be quoting up here. So it's, what is agitation? But agitation, whether spoken or written, generally focuses on one event and one contradiction and seeks to make a single idea powerfully clear to broad numbers of people. It's like a sharp knife seeking to expose and make raw a glaring contradiction and draw blood around it, which I like the imagery there. I think that's really good. So it goes down. This guy goes down to quote Mao. I cannot believe these guys are actually unironically like communists, but we're gonna go ahead and use their resource, so we know we're not misrepresenting them. Okay, this is the Mao Zedong quote, and this is talking about the role of agitation and it's building class consciousness here. Okay, and this one doesn't read that clear, so there's a little bit of an explanation I'm gonna give you after, but it says, as regards the sequence in the movement of man's knowledge, there is always a gradual growth from the knowledge of individual and particular things to the knowledge of things in general. Only after man knows the particular essence of many things can he proceed to generalization and know the common essence of things. When man attains the knowledge of this common essence, he uses it as a guide and proceeds to study various concrete things which have not yet been studied or studied thoroughly, and to discover the particular essence of each. Only thus is he able to supplement, enrich, and develop his knowledge of their common essence and prevent such knowledge from withering or petrifying. These are the two processes of cognition, one from the particular to the general, and the other from the general to the particular. This is from his work on contradiction, and it's page 320. Okay, so for example, an example that would kind of explain this. If someone should begin to get the idea that imperialism is the enemy in Africa, how terrible, how hopelessly abstract. Quick, let's put a face on the enemy, as they would say, and target some local bank. How much more concrete and how much easier for the masses to swallow. So essentially what this is doing is you're taking the general idea, applying it to something specific. Or you're taking a specific thing and using it to understand a general idea. And this is how these mass generalizations and propaganda, I think, spread so easily among the left.
Right.
because they categorize these things so sloppily. Like everything is under the umbrella of bigotry or racism.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the tricks here. But I'm going to give you a parallel that happened in Canada to kind of show you how I think this could apply here. So consider the Freedom Convoy protests in 2022 against the vaccine mandate, which Trudeau dismissed, saying they were a fringe minority that held unacceptable views. And in Winnipeg, Manitoba, a man drove his car into a group of Freedom Convoy protesters, injuring several people. So here we have, you can, I'm going to share this tab now. You can see this, right?
Yeah.
So this is CTV News in Canada. And it says Ottawa Freedom Convoy protests were unsafe and chaotic, inquiry finds. From my research, I didn't see any significant amount of violence from the protesters, but I did find that example in Winnipeg where a man drove his car into a group of Freedom Convoy protesters, likely fueled by Trudeau saying they were a fringe minority that held unacceptable views. Do you see the parallel between the Africa example and this example?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think that's pretty wild. Look at this
Absolutely.
fucking dickhead, dude.
I definitely think there's also something to be said about. I mean, this is obviously a big topic in America. The fact that that's being aired, the manipulation, my bad, in these stories. I think it definitely needs to be questioned, the influence that the government has on the media outlets in Canada. The same way that we're questioning that in the United States, I think they need to be questioning that up there.
Yeah.
It's the same thing where they're pushing these generalizations to make people feel bad and fuel their Marxist ideology. I think there needs to be a big checks and balance, a lot of checks and balances that need to be put into place here, especially in Canada and in the United States.
So do you have a couple minutes to finish off? Like, can we do 4 more minutes real quick?
I was about to say, we're about to wrap it up here, folks. We got some big things going on, but we can do a couple more minutes, wrap up what we got going on here, and
yeah, I'll go ahead, tap on one more point here, and we'll call it there. Have the part 2 coming in later tonight. So here's an interesting, I think, side theory that can kind of help us understand this. So J.L. Austin has a theory of speech known as the Speak Act theory. Okay, I'm going to share the tab here. So this theory proposes that when we speak, we're not only conveying information, but we're also performing actions through our words, meaning that saying something is doing something. All right, so hang in with me just for a second. So this theory categorizes 3 levels of speech acts. They're on your screen here, but we have a locutionary act, the act of simply saying something. So that's the literal meanings of the word. So like if I'm like, hey, that's a car, I'm just referring to a car that I see in front of me. And illocutionary act, which is the intended meaning or force behind the utterance, like making a request or giving a warning or asking a question. And then there's a perlocutionary act, which is the effect achieved by the utterance on the listener, such as persuading, convincing, or upsetting them. So under this theory, we can look at Trudeau's use of terms like racist, homophobic, or Islamophobic, or even fringe minority, or saying someone holds unacceptable views. They can be seen as performative acts that signal societal values and delegitimize dissent and rally his base into action, which would reinforce a collective identity opposed to racism and intolerance. This is the agitation that was stated by Mao as one of the essential 2 aspects needed for the revolution to happen. The other, propaganda, could be understood as Trudeau using emotionally charged language in order to connect with the masses' collective amygdala and provoking action. So his response to the trucker convoy, for example, is a textbook communist agitation and propaganda response to spark public outrage and reframe the issue. Yep. And so his consistent framing of these issues, he frames them in moral absolutes. So oppressed versus oppressor, progressive versus intolerant. It's an attempt to reshape societal norms and align the public with a specific ideological agenda. And this aligns with the communist strategy of agitation, which is necessary for the communist revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And his rhetoric contributes to a form of cultural revolution. This is important. So it's like basically where societal values are being rapidly reshaped through moralistic framing. That's kind of reminiscent of like the zeal that these communities had in historical communist movements. It's not necessarily a violent revolution, but rather a rhetorical and cultural shift driven by top-down moral leadership. And whether you agree with him or not, his strategies while prime minister have been alarmingly similar to those of historical communist regimes like Mao's China or Lenin's Soviet Union, in which he maintains plausible deniability by saying he's trying to advance progressive values, but the effect is he's polarizing political divides, employing emotional absolutism and emotional appeals, and he's deriding opponents as morally inadequate, which justifies retribution. And so that would be the end of my tirade against Trudeau at the moment.
I think that puts
part two in a minute. Any thoughts if you have?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that puts a good bow on it there. I think one thing that people need to note is that, based off what you just heard, I mean, it's pretty obvious. This is all pretty coordinated. Everything that's going on with these communists and Marxists. So I'll just say to the folks out there, stay based.
And we're going to give you video evidence in the second part showing you how this works out. Carson brought a lot of resources for this next part we're going to do. And you're going to see a lot of actual like evidence of him speaking this way.
Yep. So, I'll be doing a little bit of not necessarily a deep dive, but I'll be going into a little bit Pierre Poilievre, the new unspoken hope of Canada, their next prime minister. So I'm excited to get into that next time.
He's their only hope.
He's the Don.
All right.
He's the man.